I want to go way back to what brought you over to Italy and your journey that came there and Tematica and so forth, just to give viewers on Real Vision a sense of who you are and why you're in the old country, so to speak.
Yeah, very much the old country. Well, I was in before I came here, and I still have a base in San Diego, but was it 2012? I got an opportunity to join a family office that was fairly newly formed. It was a family that had sold a couple businesses and were in the billions. And they built a family office, and a friend of mine from business school was our chief investment officer and was kind of struggling dealing with only Italians when an awful lot of the investments that the family were getting involved with involved a partnership with Americans, with American hedge funds or so on. And they also just needed to know not just how they worked, but just to think how they think. And he also wanted to create a family office that was a little bit more of a hybrid between your more traditional European and the more American. So I took the leap. It was a time in my life where I was ready for a change. So I took the leap and came to Italy, and I was able to keep my job with Tematica, chief investment strategist there. I was able to keep that kind of work going. At the time, I was doing some other stuff, but similar, just a different company. I was able to keep that work and found that it was really actually very helpful and kind of augmented my perspective, because instead of being just in the US and trying to have an international viewpoint on things, because if you're talking macro, you have to be able to appreciate what's going on all over the world. I actually got to be in meetings with major players on the international stage, making big decisions, seeing what's going on out there, like involved in, say, an Italian bank that's really struggling. And so hearing what's going on with the ECB, things like that really gave me a better flavor for it, because it's one thing if you read about it, it's another thing if you're living it entirely.
Right. Yeah, without a doubt. And of course, that goes back to your living it, so to speak, right now in terms of in Italy. Before we had this interview, we spoke on the telephone about that too. And you told me the story of when you found out that they were moving to the extreme lockdown, that you were actually on a run. Tell that story. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it was. So they put us on the lockdown like over a weekend. And then I think it's like 2 weeks later, I'm out going for a run. And at this point it was amazing. It went within a couple of weeks. It went from where you didn't see anybody acting differently. Like everything was normal. And within a couple of weeks, it went from that to where everybody outside is wearing a mask. People are staying really far away from each other. It's that kind of look when you see someone where it's, hi, we're kind of in this together. We're all sort of commiserating. But at the same time, I'd really appreciate it if you stay far away. And I'm out on a run and I'm by myself, far away from everyone. And the police actually pulled me over and told me that I had to go back. And at that point, we weren't allowed to be more than 200 meters from home. I mean, 200 meters. What are you going to do? And that day, everything really changed. That was like 2 weeks ago. It got really bad. And now at night, you can't really be outside. I mean, there's so many police and military cruising the streets, which is it's just a bizarre thing, right? You're imprisoned and being patrolled by police and army and you haven't done anything wrong.
Right. That is bizarre. And are they taking precautions in terms of, like they have the masks and when they come up to you and so forth?
Oh yeah, they're completely masked up, gloves and everything. What's I think probably the most disturbing thing is when you go to the grocery store, it's first you have to stand in line for hours, literally, because they're only letting a few people in at a time. So if there's like 20 people trying to go to the grocery store, it's going to take a very long time. And you can't go together. People have to go just one person. You stand in these lines that are like 6-7 feet apart from one another. And then the guy who's at the entrance to the grocery store, he's literally in a complete hazmat suit with goggles and the mask and everything. And they check your temperature as you approach the door. Before they'll even let you in, they're checking your temperature. And then when you get in, there's employees of the grocery store fully hazmat suited out with the goggles and the glasses and the masks and everything. And they are following everyone around, all like 3 people in a massive grocery store. And everywhere you go, they're scrubbing right behind and spraying and disinfecting everywhere you go. It is,
Wow.
I don't know how we ever forget this, how it doesn't permanently change the way we all live. And the US is going to be facing this soon. I mean, New York is already dealing with it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when we spoke, it was probably a week ago or so, and we hadn't gotten to that point in
Yeah.
the United States. But, the numbers of cases per day in the US are now the most. I mean, your trajectory is actually flattening. So talk about flattening the curve, the stuff that you're doing now, it sounds like that's having a measured impact.
Well, we went into the lockdown because the measure that you really need to watch is called the R naught, and that's basically the rate of contagion. So if you have an R naught of 2, then that means on average every person who has the virus is going to give it to 2 people. And you can understand if you have an R naught of 1, you're going to kind of have the percent of the population that has it is going to, it's not going to accelerate. If you have it above 1, that's a big problem because you're going to get more and more of the population having it. We had an R naught of about 2.3 to 2.7 right when they did the lockdown. Right now, a little over 4 weeks in, our R naught is down to about 1.2. And they're estimating that it's going to be 0.7 by Easter. So that's when they can start to open up things. Couple interesting things that we've seen here, though, and you were saying that our case count. So our peak net new cases was March 21st. So that was a little 2.5 weeks in. We had the peak number of new cases. And ever since then we've been going down. I mean, it's not been like a solid, consistent every single day down, but on average it continues to keep dropping. So that's great. And the number of deaths, now the deaths also rolled over. That took a little bit longer. It was about a week later before the deaths really started to roll over. So there's some good signs there as well. But something that's some interesting data that recently has been released is looking at the total number of deaths in Italy in 2020 compared to each of the past 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And what they've found is that for every COVID death, you had an extra 1.5 to 1.8 additional deaths beyond what you normally have every year. And the population of Italy hasn't changed so dramatically, so you should be seeing roughly the same kind of deaths year after year. So say if you have like 100 COVID deaths, for every 100 COVID deaths, there was an additional 50 to 80 deaths beyond what you would see in a typical year. And that's across all of Italy. And if you go into Bergamo, which was the hardest hit, for every 100 deaths, you had an additional 220 deaths that are above what you would normally see. So what that is telling us is that is probably a combo of these, that there are some additional deaths that aren't being coded to a COVID death. For example, somebody passes away at home and they don't swab after the person has passed away so that they can identify this as a COVID death. But also what we're probably seeing, and this was the big concern, is also that massive stress that gets put on the medical care here. And that's what really pushed the lockdown, because you run out of hospital beds, right? And this is, everybody in the States is seeing this now with what's going on in New York. You're seeing it in Spain. Spain's just getting crushed under this. And for a little perspective on this, to point out, because we did run into a huge problem with hospital beds here in Italy, and with ventilators, people have been hearing about that. And just so that people don't think it's that Italy has, some sort of inferior medical system, there are 3.2 hospital beds in Italy for every 1,000 people. So 3.2 beds for every 1,000. The United States has 2.7.
Right.
And if we're looking at doctors, Italy has 4.1 doctors for every 1,000 persons, whereas the U.S. has 2.7. So 4.1 to 2.7. So it's not that Italy, is just underfunded in the healthcare sector.
Interesting, and when you mentioned Spain and Bergamo, it immediately made me think of when we were talking. You talked about a Champions League match that was what you might call a super spreader. The Mardi Gras of Italy. I think it was Atalanta against Valencia. And tell me what have people ascertained about that match and why that matters?
Yeah, so we had, we'd all heard about South Korea had that, I think it was patient like 31, the super spreader who was at a church function and just got a ton of people sick from that one event. Well, people were asking, why did Italy get hit so hard? And then why did Spain get hit so hard following that? It's a little strange. I mean, part is because Italy has some fairly close ties with Wuhan. You have direct flights from Milan to Wuhan, but that didn't really explain this explosion that we saw here. And what they think is that there was a very similar event to the South Korea super spreader, where we had that soccer tournament between a team from Bergamo, Atalanta, and a team from Spain, Valencia. Now, the game was just too big of a game, and so many people wanted to watch it that they couldn't host it in Bergamo, so it was held in Milan. So you have this huge match in Milan, tons of people at it, and they think that there were enough people who were sick at that game that you ended up having this huge spread of the virus, right? Because everybody comes to see the games. There's like tens of thousands of people, and then they go back to Spain and they go back to Bergamo, which explains why Bergamo got hit so much harder than anybody else.